Today I'm out in Arizona driving the 2023 Ford Edge, but this is not your typical drive video because this is a Hertz rental car special. This is actually a 2023 Ford Edge Titanium with about 23,000 miles on it already. You might want to take a look at a Ford Edge if you're looking at something like a Ford Escape or a RAV4 or a CR-V and you want more room on the inside. That's always been one of the big reasons I recommend shoppers that have a family or are just looking for a bit more room to take a look at the Edge or some of the other options in this segment. This is obviously a very direct competitor to something like the Nissan Murano and of course the Hyundai Santa Fe. But the Edge is arguably one of the vehicles that started this segment. You can see that it's boxy and practical back here, but it is definitely a little bit higher off the ground and a little bit longer than a Ford Escape. We'll talk about the benefit of that added width in a moment, but let's talk about the front end design and the added width that you get, because not only is this longer than an Escape, it is wider. So it looks a bit more, I guess, grown up, you might say, a little bit more aggressive up front. Of course, we have LED headlights in this model. The grille does change a bit depending on which engine you get under the hood, and there are only two on offer for 2023. Most of the versions will have the 2-liter turbo that this model has on board. Now, I apologize for this particular Edge being really dirty. Over the last 5 days and about 650 miles, I've been driving from Phoenix to Flagstaff, Arizona and Sedona, and it was snowing heavily up there, so there was a lot of grit on the road. But I think it gives you an idea of what it's going to look like when dirty, and it certainly gives me an idea of how easy the Edge is to clean. Some folks have thought that the Edge in this redesign was a little bit too egg-shaped, and it certainly has some rounded proportions and smoother lines out back, I guess you could say. But that also makes things like these tail lamp modules in this rear portion a lot easier to clean when you do get to it. We also have full LED taillight modules, which is a nice touch, including LED turn signals, something that you don't typically find on smaller and less expensive crossovers. Now for 2023, the Edge starts just under $38,000. So obviously more than a Ford Escape, but definitely within the pricing envelope of an Escape, a RAV4, etc. Now for 2024, the rumor mill is telling us we will get an all-new Ford Edge. So this video really applies to this particular model that's only going to be sold for the next few months or so. Purring along under this very dirty hood is one of the reasons you might want to get a Ford Edge over an Escape. We have more power standard. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo, and all-wheel drive is standard on all Edges for 2023. If you want a bit more oomph, there's also a 2.7-liter twin-turbo 6-cylinder engine on offer in the Edge. But there is something you should know. If you get the twin-turbo 6, torque is pretty limited in first and second gear. This uses an 8-speed automatic transmission, but it can't handle as much oomph as that 2.7-liter turbo is capable of. So versus other Ford models that have their twin-turbo 6, the Edge is quick, but not quite as quick as some of those other options. One of the other reasons to get the Edge is interior roominess. You'll definitely notice when you hop inside the Edge that the passenger seat is a little bit further away, and I get more headroom than you'll find in the average compact crossover. The dashboard, as we'll get to in a moment, is certainly shaped a bit more classic Ford than current new Ford, but the other big reason is of course going to be back here in the rear, where we find a lot more legroom and a lot more headroom than in the average compact crossover. If I go ahead and move things from this road trip up there to the front seats and hop back here, you can see I have several inches of headroom left back here and several inches of legroom, even though this front seat is all the way back in its tracks. If you're looking for a family vehicle that's going to be easier to accommodate child seats and adults in the rear, this is certainly going to be a solid option. Even if your kids are in booster seats or forward-facing seats, the width of the rear bench means that it's much easier to put a child seat in the middle and then still have a human on the other side. We also have a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back itself, not out of the ceiling, and that certainly makes installing those child seats a lot easier. The cargo area is clearly another reason to get the Edge over the average compact crossover. As you can see, you can put a wide variety of luggage back here. This cargo area is cavernous, and it's also more square than the average compact crossover. You can see leaning in, I have to really lean over quite a lot in order to actually touch that rear headrest right there. And this portion of the cargo area is definitely much deeper, even though we do have this slanting opening back here. Now, under the load floor in this model, we don't have a spare tire, but there is room to actually put one under there. Ford decided to save a little bit of weight, and instead this particular model has a can of Fix-A-Flat and some extra storage area under the trunk. Now, one problem with the Edge continues to be the height of this hatch. If you're 6 feet tall, this is definitely a problem, and if you're taller than I am, you're probably just going to end up bashing the side all the time. The interior of the Edge definitely feels a little bit old school Ford here and there. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, height adjustable headrests as well. The seat backs are relatively thin, but I did find them comfortable on longer journeys. We have spent hours and hours at a time in this vehicle. We have two-way adjustable lumbar support for the driver's seat. But interestingly, for one of the more expensive vehicles in Ford's lineup, nothing for the passenger side, although it is a power seat. Decent percentage of soft touch materials on the upper section of the door, hard plastics down there around that storage area at the bottom of the door, just as you'd expect. It's not really cut out for larger bottles though, although smaller knickknacks fit in. Moving over to the dashboard, soft touch materials up top. You can see that this sort of metallic plastic insert right here, this trim piece, hasn't worn quite as well as some might like, although this has had a pretty hard life. Moving down from there, we have a bin-style glove compartment. I was able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. And speaking of tablets, that is the big change for this interior. Now, this was not a 2023 change, this happened for 2022, but all models now get this large, just over 12-inch touchscreen infotainment system. Now, this is not a 2023 change, this happened in 2022, but all trims get this large, just over 12-inch touchscreen LCD. We have a small storage area right there on top, along with that center channel speaker, and you can see it occupies the entire area in the dashboard where the infotainment and controls for the climate control system used to be. We have basically the same air vents on either side of that. This has Apple CarPlay or Android Auto running right there in the middle, and you can choose a slightly larger or slightly smaller version. The software is very similar to what we first saw in the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and it is just about as slow as the Mach-E's software as well. I generally am okay with that because I'd rather have the full functionality of this system, which definitely is very feature-rich, including downloadable mobile apps, etc., but you should keep in mind that the display is not as responsive as I might like. For the climate control, most of the controls are in the infotainment software itself. All touch right there. We only have some essential controls down here like the front defroster right there. Down here we have some infotainment controls, and those are basically duplicated within the infotainment software as well. Down here we have a storage area that does not have a lid, so nothing closes that off at all. We do have a wireless charging mat down there below and two USB inputs, one USB-C, one regular USB. We have pretty decently sized cup holders over here, but they're on the shallow side, so some of these narrower bottles kind of flop around. We have a rotary style shifter here, electric parking brake, auto start stop enable disable button there, parking sensor enable disable, and then a padded center armrest with two tiers of storage. You can take that out or insert that right there. As I said, this interior feels like it's from a slightly different era, and it's really obvious when you look at the distance from the driver and front passenger to the dashboard. That's a really long way there. We have a very long windshield, and we have windshield wipers that operate in that fashion right there, which honestly I think is kind of cool. But down here we find the thing that is not quite so cool, just over 4-inch LCDs on either side of this physical speedometer. I was really into this design about 10 years ago, but now it feels a little bit small compared to some of the full LCD clusters out there. They're controlled via these controls on the steering wheel. This one controls the left screen, and this basically gives us things like trip computer, fuel economy, driver assistance, and certain vehicle settings. The right side LCD gives us turn-by-turn navigation directions, access to the Bluetooth phone interface, and infotainment controls as well, but it's not as feature-rich as some of Ford's more modern LCD clusters. Moving out from there, we find the same sort of steering wheel we've had for a while. Steering assist button there, cruise control there. This one has adaptive cruise control. Over here we have some infotainment buttons, and then you'll find the lane keeping assist button right there at the end of the turn signal stalk. You'll notice that one thing we don't find on the steering wheel, paddle shifters. I did find that to be a bummer going down some of the longer downhill runs on this particular trip. Now, we do have a sport mode right over here. It's the button right here inside the shifter, but that doesn't let you control what gear you're in. It just tries to use a slightly lower gear most of the time. Also, something that's definitely from a different era at Ford is this storage area right behind the infotainment controls. It is just about as wide as this plastic water bottle, but it's not terribly tall. Let's run through the specifications pretty quickly. The last time I was able to 0 to 60 test the Edge, it had the same engine and same transmission. I went 0 to 60 in about 7.5 seconds. 60 to 0, that took about 125 feet. So this is right in line with a decent number of compact crossovers. The big thing to know about the Edge is it's relatively heavy. Not only is that going to affect your acceleration and your braking times, it's also going to affect the handling of the Edge. This is certainly tuned towards the softer side of things. So another reason you might want to get the Edge over an Escape is if you want something that's more comfortable for longer road trips like I spent this week doing. You'll certainly notice that out on rougher roads where this is not bobbling you around like a bobblehead quite as much as the Escape. I would say that the suspension in the ST is definitely firmer, but it's still not as firm as a sporty compact crossover. Now, interesting twist, in the US, you won't find too many sporty compact crossovers outside the luxury segment, but you will find, of course, over 300 horsepower in that Edge ST. I'm glad that Ford decided to make all-wheel drive standard. Without it, the vehicle spends a lot of time spinning the front tires. The 2-liter turbo is the least powerful engine in the lineup, but it produces 280 pound-feet of torque. And first gear is pretty aggressive with the 8-speed, so lots and lots of wheel spin up front if you're not careful. As far as the scores go, when it comes to handling, I'm going to give this a B. You will certainly find more engaging options out there, but it does come with a really great ride. I'm going to give that an A. If you want a softer, more supple ride, you're going to have to spend a lot more on something like a 2-row Grand Cherokee with the optional air suspension. That is sort of a sideways competitor to this. The Grand Cherokee has become more premium in this last generation, a lot more expensive, of course, and certainly still more off-road focused than the Edge. Over the last 650 miles of driving, this engine and transmission have delivered pretty impressive fuel economy, been averaging 25 miles per gallon. Bear in mind that Arizona has some pretty high speed limits. In most of rural Arizona, it's about 75 miles an hour, and I was definitely going up to higher altitudes. Flagstaff is around 7,000 feet. Those mountain passes around Flagstaff can be even higher, and this performed really quite well, even though temperatures were sometimes below 30 degrees. All of that normally drops fuel economy down, so 25 miles per gallon is pretty impressive for a vehicle this size with standard all-wheel drive. Obviously, if you want better fuel economy, you're going to be looking at one of the hybrid alternatives in this segment, and one of the very few would, of course, be the Santa Fe hybrid. It's not going to have the same level of power we get out of this system, but it is going to feel pretty traditional with that regular 6-speed automatic transmission, and it's going to give you better fuel economy. Of course, you could get something plug-in like the Santa Fe plug-in or the Grand Cherokee plug-in, but that Grand Cherokee is quite expensive. Perhaps the best thing that I can say about the Edge is that this comes across very well-rounded. It's got a roomy area in the back, it's decent to drive, it gets good fuel economy, etc. It's not the most fun entry in this segment, it's not the most fuel-efficient entry in this segment, but it's also priced pretty well. If you want to get your hands on a Ford Edge, these are obviously on sale right now because Hertz already has one, and they're going to start around $38,000. As equipped here, about $44,000. If you want all of the bells and whistles with that 2.7-liter turbo engine, that would be the Edge ST. You're looking at around $47,000 to $48,000, plus, of course, some of the optional accessories that are available on that model. Now, in this segment, you have a lot to choose from. Obviously, you could get something that's smaller and easier to park, like a RAV4, a CR-V, or Ford's own Escape. Or you could end up in this sort of tweener category, where it is certainly smaller than the Ford Explorer, something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee, etc., but this is a little bit easier to park than some of those options. The Grand Cherokee has grown a decent amount in this generation, and of course it has sprouted a third row in the Grand Cherokee L. It would be the direct competitor, I guess you could say, to the Ford Explorer. This is not related to the Explorer in this generation at all. This is a front-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive system, even though that all-wheel drive system is standard, which is pretty different than what we find in the Explorer, which is rear-wheel drive by default. Direct competitors to this would be something like the Nissan Murano and the Hyundai Santa Fe. The Santa Fe is going to be a lot less expensive because it does not come standard with a 2-liter turbocharged engine. It's optional in that model. The engine and the standard feature set are the important thing to keep in mind with the Santa Fe. You can get one for about the same price as a relatively inexpensive Escape, but you're not going to be getting any more feature content on the inside. In fact, you might get a little bit less, which is logical because it's a bigger vehicle, of course. One last thing to know about the Escape, no hybrid system is available, and that's always surprised me a bit. I fully expected Ford at some point to just transplant the Escape's hybrid system right into the Edge. And for some reason, they have decided never to do that. So if you want better fuel economy, you will have to look at something like an Escape, or of course the RAV4, CR-V, etc. And you can also get a plug-in hybrid system in your Escape. But it's going to be a lot easier to get an Edge right now than any of the other compact crossover options because for some reason this mid-size crossover segment has not sold as well as the next size category down. And that also applies to the Nissan Murano, the Santa Fe, and some of the other direct competitors to this. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And would you be more interested in something like the Santa Fe than the Edge, or vice versa? Personally, I would choose the Edge or the Santa Fe over the Murano. The Murano is certainly very style-forward, very swoopy, but the CVT saps a decent amount of fun out of it, and it doesn't feel, oddly enough, quite as fresh and as modern as this or the Santa Fe, even though both the Edge and the Santa Fe look like they're getting completely redesigned for 2024. We don't know exactly what that's going to hold for the Edge. We have seen some spy shots out of China. It's most likely going to look like that model, so a little bit sharper, wearing the latest sheet metal from the Ford lineup. And it kind of looks like the Santa Fe is going in a direction to maybe imitate Land Rover as far as its boxy exterior design. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned for more videos coming up soon, and I'll see all of you next week.